costing around $400,000 then. That would be around $13 million today. The castle's construction was headed by a man named Ernest Flagg. He was a popular architect of the time and was a good friend of the Bourne family because he previously built their 110-room mansion down in Oakdale, Long Island, called Indian Neck Hall. So by comparison, this castle only has 28 rooms, so Frederick referred to this as his small hunting lodge. He was pretty modest. Now, when Ernest Flagg was designing this castle, at the same time he was reading a book called Woodstock, written by Sir Walter Scott. Doesn't have anything to do with the music festival in the 60s. In this book, there was another castle called the Towers, and he decided he would use that castle as the inspiration for this one. He incorporated things like a great hall, a secret passageway system, and even a dungeon. If you look up at the turret tower here on the side of the castle, that smaller window right in the middle is the window to the dungeon. Since 2003, tours have run here at the castle. Actually, across the river, you'll see another island. That is called Corn Island, and the Bourne family used to own that one as well. They operated a small farm over there growing, you can probably guess what, they grew corn there, pretty inventive name. Now, they also used it as a place to store alcohol because they owned this castle during Prohibition. So during the 1920s, it was not legal to have any alcohol here, but it was legal on Corn Island because it is in Canadian waters. The Canadian border is less than 100 feet off the shore of this island in that direction. So we're so close to the border, you might even get a welcome to Canada text message while you're... Now on our way along the path here, this first building you'll see on the left is the squash court. Squash is similar to racquetball if you're unfamiliar. But this building was built by Marjorie as a surprise for her husband Alexander's birthday in 1928. The weirdest part about this surprise, though, is that he was on the island the whole time it was being built, and he didn't notice it until it was finished.
Uncle Sam, the only people that come over here?
They're the only tour company that comes here now. We do have a shuttle that runs from Schermerhorns Harbor. It's about a 20-minute boat ride upriver. They bring people here every hour on the hour, and then we also allow private boaters to come on their own as well.
Anybody from Canada?
We used to have a boat from Rockport that came here every few months, but I think they stopped doing that because of COVID. So the next building you'll see here on the left, this is the North Boathouse. This is where the male servants would be staying because supplies from the mainland would come into this boathouse, and the male servants needed to be ready to carry those supplies through an underground tunnel. That starts at that stone archway right in front of it, goes underneath the courtyard, and ends over in the rose garden on the other side of that stone wall. Now the reason for this underground tunnel, as well as the secret passageways we'll be seeing in the castle, was because at that time it was uncommon to see servants walking around when guests were present. So Frederick decided he would use these tunnels and passageways from Woodstock as a way to transport the servants around the island without being seen, almost creating an illusion that the castle was kind of running on its own. Which is probably why the castle got a haunted reputation. I imagine it was the guests were pretty freaked out when they would leave the room for a second and things were just moved around. Now in regards to this tunnel, he also didn't want servants coming up above and interrupting any tennis matches that would have been going on. If we head along the path this way, if you look on the railing here, you'll see a picture of that tennis court that used to be here. The tennis court was taken out in the 1960s by Dr. Martin because it was a grass court. It was a lot of work to keep up with, and because of the cage that surrounded it, he felt that took away from the great view of the castle from the outside. Along with that picture, you'll see 4 pictures of the generator system down in the North Boathouse. That used to power the entire island, but it stopped working in the 1970s, and since then power has come directly from the American mainland. They run lines underneath the water, and that is how most of the islands are powered now. So then the last building we have on the left here, this is the original ice house for the island. Servants would stay here year-round and collect ice from the river during the winter. They would then store it in this building, and by pouring sawdust on it, it would preserve the ice to use for drinks during the summer. Eventually, though, of course, the freezer was invented and they had no need for that building. But instead of knocking it down, they decided to turn it into something else, the bridal cottage that we use for the weddings we do here on the island. We usually have our weddings right over here in the rose garden. There's a little square plot on the other side, of course, with a great view of the river in the background. But once we're on the terrace where that other group is now, later on in the tour, you'll get a better view of the rose garden from above.
Watch your step on the window. Oh.
Another step.
Yes.
Okay.
Watch your step.
Step up and step down.
Hold on. Reminds me of her life. Sometimes, right?
So everyone, this is the library. There are around 3,000 books in here. All of them are original to the castle. And among them, right here on the mantle in this glass case, is a first edition copy of Woodstock, the book that the castle is based on. Right next to that, here's our first secret passageway we'll be seeing, and I recommend if you guys want to move over here to see. The first way to open it involves taking a penny and placing it between two screws here underneath the mantle. That completes an electric circuit that unlocks the mechanism on the other side of the panel, so you can put it forward. Now, if a servant didn't have a coin or the power was out, they could take this false light switch out of the wall in the shelf. Behind it, there's a ring attached to the doorknob on the other side of the panel. So when you pull it, it opens right up. It even comes with a creepy creak. Extended tours, we take passageways. It's hard to coordinate with bigger groups because they're narrow and people get lost.
Oh,
Yes. Now, also here in the library, we have these two lamps in the middle. They are not just any ordinary lamps. They are actually bug catchers. They would suck the bugs up through these fans into a sticky adhesive that would be found at the top. Then every few days, a lucky servant would have to come by and clean it up, and now that's a lucky tour guide.
Oh, here it is.
All right, everyone, so this is the Great Hall. This is supposed to be the most medieval room in the castle because this is the first room that Frederick's guests would be seeing on their way in. He would take them right in through that main door behind you over there. So he wanted to give off the most medieval impression right off the bat. And you get that impression from the sandstone used throughout the room. This is the only place in the whole castle where granite is not used. You can also tell from the suits of armor, like the one over here in this corner, as well as this weapons cabinet right here. And if you look above that cabinet, you'll see a semicircle mirror. There's another one directly across from it over this fireplace. Now those are called infinity mirrors because if you look into one of them, it looks as if the room goes on forever. Those were added because the architect Ernest Flagg thought this room was too small for the Great Hall of the castle. So he thought by adding those mirrors, it would make the room look a little bigger. Also here in the Great Hall, we have the castle's wine cellar. Guests stay overnight. They are allowed to bring their own alcohol. They often leave their names signed on the bottles they bring, and then they leave them here in the wine cellar to leave their mark on castle history. So all of the bottles you see in here right now are not original, and unfortunately they are empty as well, and I've checked. But also here in the wine cellar is another secret passageway. It's this false shelf right next to me here. And you might think to open this one, maybe you turn a wine bottle or something like that. That would be really cool, so you just push this one forward. Not as exciting as the last one, but this does lead in two different directions. On the left is the tunnel that goes back over into the library, and on the right there's a spiral staircase that goes all the way up to the top of the castle and branches off to almost every room in it. All of the passageways are interconnected. It's a system that runs throughout the castle, so you can go into any entrance and end up anywhere else in the castle. And before we head upstairs, you are welcome to take a step up there and get a closer look into that passageway. But I'll make one more note about this room. You might have noticed these several Singer sewing machines in here. You'll see one in almost every room of the castle, but they are not original. They've been donated by families over the last 20 years to fit the Singer theme of the castle. We used to have to ask for donations on tour, but eventually we got so many. So all the ones you will see in the castle, though, still work. And the oldest one is right back over there by the library. It's from 1861.
He never owns it. He never owns it. He's just the president.
Correct. Yes. He was friends with the son of one of the founders. And then he worked his way up the corporate ladder to become president. Now next, once you're ready, you can head up to the second floor. We'll go into the door on the left, into the dining room. So everyone, this is the dining room. This is where the Bourne family would have their dinner, and they would have their breakfast in the next room over, because when you have enough money to build a castle mansion, you're not going to have all your meals in just one room. So Frederick and his wife Emma sat at each end of the table, and they had call buttons placed on each end. Those were connected to the kitchen directly below us. So when they pressed those buttons, it would alert the servants that they were ready for their next meal or another drink. They would prepare anything of that sort down below, and then either bring it up a set of stairs or send it up a dumbwaiter into the room on the other side of that door. That is the butler's pantry. But they never really had to use those call buttons under the table, because if you look way up there at the top of the room, that grate is connected to the secret passageways. And during all meals, that is where a servant would be stationed, so they could look down through that grate, off of this large mirror here above the Italian marble fireplace, and then onto the table to make sure the Bourne family had everything they needed before they even knew they needed it.
Fred, one of his.
Yeah, that would
Frederick
be,
Remington.
would be the.
At that museum. Yeah. He has them in the White House.
And I've seen some of the pictures here signed for
So everyone, this is the breakfast room, of course, where they would have breakfast. The room used to be about a third of the size it is now, and you can see a picture of what it used to look like right back there in the window. But in 1913, Frederick wanted to extend guest rooms above us, so he had to extend this whole wing of the castle. The room now offers a great view to have breakfast with, both showing the American side of the river behind me here, as well as the Canadian side over there. Now, for the entire duration of the castle's history, though, this was not always used as the breakfast room. I mentioned Dr. Martin was a priest and he had services here. This is where he held his services. They did not have pews, instead they had chairs that they organized in rows. Not these chairs though, they were purchased from IKEA a couple years ago, you just can't tell. And his altar was right at the top of the room there where the piano is now. Now, although these chairs and tables might not be that old, the oldest piece of furniture in the entire castle is in this room. It's this dining set right back here, and it is from the 15th century. Wow. And you'll notice on the second level of the table, there's some leaves that come out. Even with those, there's not a single nail or screw in the table. So everyone, from the terrace, if you look off of the short end over here, that's where you'll get a better look at the rose garden that we passed by earlier on the tour. All of the flowers you see in there right now are the When it was raining, Frederick did not like to bring his guests all the way up the bridle path that we came up at the beginning of the tour, because by the time they got into the castle, they would be soaked. So he had the clock tower built on top of the south boathouse, right by where your boat docked when we started the tour. That way, when his guests arrived at the island, they could dock their boats right there in the boathouse. Then they could go up the clock tower through a set of stairs on the inside and across this little walkway that connects the clock tower to the full group of 8 people. Again, on average, it's about $150 a person. And along with just being able to stay in a castle overnight, you get the entire island to yourselves, meaning you do not have to share the place with another party. The only other person here is the caretaker. You'll have access to all the other buildings on the island, all the secret passageways, roped off rooms, and even the dungeon. You get a continental breakfast, a catered dinner, and even a caretaker and servant to boss around for the night. And that servant can even be me. So you put them like this, and put your skin out further.
And the box behind it.
Those movies would only be about 20 seconds long in black and white. Now, because nothing like the English Civil War would happen at this castle, and because Frederick thought the eyes being cut out of it was just way too creepy, he instead had the portrait placed so it could be tilted back by the servants so they could check out on the man down here. And just like the grate back in the dining room, that painting is only accessible through the secret passageways. There's a level of the passageway that
servants left down.
Yeah, down there.
All right, everyone. So these are the female servants' quarters. Again, the male servants would be staying out in the north boathouse. When Frederick owned the castle, he had around 30 servants total, and up to 9 would be staying in this room. they all had to share that one bathroom back there in the turret because of how limited plumbing was at the time. Now, when Marjorie owned the castle, she only had a couple servants, and she let them go home at the end of the day, so they did not need a place to stay here at the castle. Instead, this is where her nieces and nephews liked to stay when they came to visit. They liked this room especially because of the great view out the windows, and when ships went by at night, sometimes they would shine their lights in on this creepy castle they heard about, and because of the way these windows are designed, if the light ever caught them, it would refract through the glass and bounce off of the mirrors on these closets up onto the vaulted ceiling, and it would create a little light show that reminded the kids a lot of Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. Now also, when we were heading up the stairs, you might have noticed a couple other rooms off to the side, the first one being a couple steps down. That is a guest bedroom, and the reason it's like that is because at that time, they believed the higher up in a building you slept meant the lower your social status was. So Frederick feared that his guests that would be staying in that room would feel insulted that they were placed on the same floor as the servants. So he had the room put down just a couple steps, so it's not technically on the same